Hello everyone, my name is Hailey Elizabeth, and if you don't know who I am, I post videos pertaining to a little bit of whatever I want. Conspiracy theories, controversial people, true crime, vlogs, just a little bit of everything. So if you're interested in any of that, you can subscribe, and if not, totally chill. We are just here to do some makeup, talk some true crime, and for today's case we are going to be talking about the case of Matthew Trussler. Now there is a lot to get through, so we're just going to hop right into it. Before getting into the rest of today's video, I do want to give a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Native. Now if you guys don't know what Native is a deodorant brand that only uses simple and effective ingredients like coconut oil and shea butter. They are aluminum free, paraben free, vegan, and cruelty free. Some of my favorite deodorants from Native is lavender rose, coconut and vanilla, and butter cream and French vanilla. The texture is extremely smooth and not sticky, and it genuinely lasts all day long. With Native, I've done like some workouts and stuff like that wearing Native, and even after my workout, like, I still smell good. And my all-time favorite has to be lavender and rose. It smells like I'm like running through a field of like flowers in spring. Love it. But Native has a wide range of choices, along with new and limited edition scents being released all the time, such as Native's recent scent, their Candy Shop collection. It smells so amazing, kind of like sweet but with a hint of fruitiness, which is perfect for the springtime. Now if you guys want Native for yourself, all you need to do is click my link down below and use my code HAILEYE2 for 20% off your Native purchase. Thank you again to Native for sponsoring today's video. Now back to your video. Matthew Trussler was born on January 11th, 1994 to his mother Margaret and his father David, as well as his older brother Sean. He grew up in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, and as a kid and even in his teenage years, everyone that knew Matthew described Matthew to be like your typical soft boy. He had very wholesome energy, like he was the type of guy that you just always felt safe around, that type of guy that you would see at a record shop or a cafe. He was just overall a really like wholesome guy and basically just got along with everyone. He was the type of guy, like, if you had a problem with Matthew, it was definitely a you problem because Matthew didn't do anything. But although Matthew was very friendly and outgoing on the outside, unfortunately on the inside it was not like that. Mostly during his high school years, struggled with a lot of mental health issues, and this definitely took a big toll on him. And so then after high school he decided to move on to college. He attended Westfield State University and got his degree in business, and later became a manager at an Italian restaurant. Worked at this Italian restaurant for a little bit until he just realized it was something that he didn't really want to do for the rest of his life, and he realized that the longer he worked there, the more his mental health was declining. And so in this rut, he decides to pack up all of his things and move out to Florida to work with his brother Sean. And in 2015, that is when he moved out with his brother Sean, just to basically get away from his hometown, and this definitely changed Matthew's life around. Before, when he was living in Massachusetts, he just didn't really know what to do. He felt super sad, super lost, but as soon as he got to Florida and started, working outside all day and being surrounded by people all day, down the road he would quit the construction job with his brother and move over to a tech company called Lantern Energy, and then shortly after that he quit that job and started working at a job called Elite Foam, which basically Elite Foam does like home insulations and stuff like that, like in your walls. Matthew absolutely loved this new job. The pay for this job was really good. The hours were really good. He loved all of his co-workers. It was kind of the type of job where you go in but it doesn't even feel like work because all your co-workers are your friends, so you're just kind of like hanging out and doing work all day. So he was just thriving in all areas of his life. He lived with his brother, he had a good paying job, a job that he liked with good hours. He was living in Florida where the weather was beautiful all the time. Like, his life had just turned itself around. So then in 2016, that is when Matthew decided to, get back in the dating scene, because at this point, as I said, he's got really good stuff stuff going for him. So he thinks, you know, maybe he wants to share this with someone. And then on April 26th of 2016, that is when Matthew had matched with a girl named Melissa Turner on Tinder. Little bit of backstory on Melissa Turner. Melissa Turner was born on November 25th, 1992 in Tampa Bay, Florida. And unfortunately, she had a very rough upbringing. Her parents were extremely abusive, and as to cope with her abusive household, she would binge eat. And because of her binge eating disorder, she developed a lot of insecurities about herself and her body, but it was just a very, very hard time for her, and in her late teens, she had actually reached 250 pounds. A lot of people who knew Melissa would describe her as a teenager to be very, very quiet, but she was outgoing once you got to know her a little bit more. She loved things like horror movies and anime and cosplaying and video games. After high school, she decided to move on to college and went to a community college and got her associates in business. It was after college where Melissa just realized that she needed to do something about her weight. It was something that was a big health concern at this point. Just didn't want to feel like a prisoner in her own body, basically. And so she decided to get more and more into fitness, and she actually ended up losing over 100 pounds within her first year. So because of her insane success on her weight loss journey, she decided to document her weight loss journey on social media, specifically Instagram. So at first she was just a typical fitness influencer. She would post like her workouts, her diet plans, like what she was doing, but then later down the road, these pictures would become a little bit more flirty, I guess, and then it transitioned into more X-rated content. So she took her following that she had from her fitness Instagram and started moving over to OF and Patreon. It was said that Melissa actually did really, really well on Patreon and OnlyFans, and it was suspected that she was getting up to $20,000 a month. With her newfound confidence in her new body, as I said, she had gone through like this entire weight loss journey. She wanted to, you know, show off what she had been working so hard for, and so she decided to become a cam girl. She became a cam girl on multiple cam girl sites and would even collab with other like cam girls and cam guys. And on her cam girl website, she went by the name Two Thorn Rose, aka Rose. And a little warning, if you do look up Two Thorn Rose or if you look up Melissa Turner, there is a lot of like explicit videos on there, explicit videos that she's done in the past. So I just wanted to give that warning real quick.
I am Two Thorn Rose. You can call me Rose. I'm a cam model. I'm an artist. I love fitness. I like making videos about that and about my art and just about my daily life. And my channel over on YouTube, where I was doing all of that stuff, got deleted. I just want a place where I can post my videos, where I can talk about my life, where I can show my artwork, my cosplays, and I'm hoping Twitch is going to be my new home and that I'm not going to get deleted on here.
But Melissa's friends would actually go on to say that although Melissa was extremely successful, they definitely could tell how the fame got to her head. As I said, Melissa didn't really grow up. She just never really felt secure in her body. And so now that all of these people are giving her attention online and giving her all the things that she's craved, she wants more of it. And so that's when her friends said that Melissa, she became very, very money obsessed. She became obsessed with her appearance and likes and comments. It just seemed like Melissa's whole personality had just become her cam girl site and her physical appearance. Prior to her becoming a cam girl, she was actually working two part-time jobs, one at Great American Cookie and the other one at Haagen-Dazs. And so she had actually quit both of her part-time jobs to pursue being a cam girl and working on OF and Patreon full time. And since this was making 10 times more money than her other two jobs, she was not going to end anytime soon. And then in April of 2016, that is when Melissa had matched with Matthew Trussler on Tinder. It was said that when the couple first met, they immediately hit it off and they started dating just a month after knowing each other. And then a year later, in October of 2017, that's when the couple got their first apartment with one another. And then also in 2017, Melissa was actually making enough money that she was able to pay off her college debt, which was $26,000. And not only was she able to pay off all of her college tuition, she actually got some work done on her body. She got a corset trunkplasty and a thigh lift, as well as a tuck, and which all of these surgeries would cost around $50,000. And you would think, you know, paying just like $50,000 just outright, you would be out of money for a little bit, but no. The following year, in 2018, the couple ended up buying and moving into a huge house in Riverview, Florida. It was in a very suburban town, and so the house was very suburban, and I'm assuming they bought the house because later on, as you'll see, they talk about like renovations on the house. So I'm assuming the house is theirs, which is crazy because even if you look at like the real estate in that area, the cheapest house is like $300,000. This house was beautiful. It had a beautiful living room, a big backyard area for their animals, because the couple actually had 3 cats, a dog, and a snake. And that's because Matthew was a big animal lover. Even Matthew's family would go on to say that it was Matthew's dream to have a farm one day. He was the type of guy that didn't really want kids when he grew up. He mostly just wanted a bunch of animals. And shortly after they moved into this house, that's when Matthew had actually quit his job at Elite Foam to just be a full-time stay-at-home husband. So Melissa would basically do her camgirl sites and work up all day in her office, while Matthew, he tended to the house. So if there was like an issue that the house had, he would fix it. He would take care of the animals. He would cook for him and Melissa. And Matthew later down the road would even start to appear in some of Melissa's X-rated content. And so as you can see at this point, Melissa is like his entire life. Melissa is all he knows. Melissa has given Matthew the life that he always dreamed of. So because of this, he started to spend more and more time with Melissa, but that meant he began distancing himself more and more from his family. And at the time of his death, he actually hadn't spoken to his brother Sean in 6 months. But it's not like there was any bad blood between Matthew and his family. If his family were to call him, he would pick up and talk to them, but he wouldn't voluntarily call anyone or try to go out and visit them. Even Matthew's friends would also say that Matthew never really went out like he typically did anymore. He was mostly at the house with Melissa all day. Apparently, even though the couple only spoke to each other, their relationship was thriving because Matthew had actually proposed to Melissa and planned on getting married that summer. Another really odd thing about that is that Matthew's family wasn't even made aware that the couple had been engaged. That was something that he just didn't tell them because, again, he never really spoke to his family. Although the couple seemed to be doing well, it wasn't until September 25th of 2018 where we visibly start to see how the relationship is starting to struggle. Melissa used to have this ex-boyfriend that went by Sin, aka Christopher, and apparently when her and Christopher broke up, Christopher got really jealous of Melissa and Matthew's relationship, and there was actually one incident where Christopher had showed up to the house and pulled a gun out on Matthew as a threat to basically like stop dating Melissa so then I can date her. But on Melissa's website, there was an anonymous person that said, quote, "Okay, that guy is a walking nutcase. Seriously, this dude needs a reality check and realize that the world doesn't revolve around them." And to that, Melissa replies saying, quote, "He literally said he thought my abusive ex that pulled a gun and tried to kill my current boyfriend was right. Calling him a nutcase is going easy on him, I think." Christopher, from police records, actually ended up getting arrested on 2 counts of domestic violence and 2 counts of like assault with a deadly weapon. But despite everything going on, it seemed like Melissa was happy. And on September 23rd, someone on her camgirl site had asked, quote, "How are things with the boyfriend?" And she said, quote, "Amazing. I'm still as happy a year and a half in as I was at the beginning." So as you can see, September 23rd, she was extremely happy, but it seemed like behind the scenes, the couple was actually struggling because that same exact day, Matthew had posted to his Facebook account saying, quote, "Don't be a fool fool and blame others. Fight your own war. And it was also on this day where he had changed his relationship status from engaged to single, inferring that the couple broke up. And a lot of like close family and friends of Melissa and Matthew will tell you that the couple behind the scenes was very, very toxic with one another. The neighbors say that they constantly heard the couple fighting, and even Matthew's older brother Sean said that no one in the family really liked Melissa because they felt like Melissa was stealing him away from them. Matthew on social media seemed to be happy, and on January 11th, on his 25th birthday, he said, quote, "Quarter century later, I've got a mortgage, a pup, 4 fur babies, and a wonderful girl. I am a happy man. I also realized I'm getting older because instead of sleeping in, my ass woke up at 6:30 without an alarm." So it seemed from that like he was doing really well, and he even called Melissa a wonderful girl, so it seems like they were doing really well at this point. So as far as where the couple stands in their relationship, it's very confusing to try to figure out if they were dating, if they weren't dating. If you and your spouse continuously break up and get back together, that is not a healthy relationship. That's not a relationship that's just gonna magically work one day. It seems like you guys need time apart in order for it to work. Then on October 17th of 2019, Melissa says that the day started off normal. Melissa had woken up at 4 a.m. that day like she usually does for work, and then she worked until about 9, and then at 9 is when Matthew had woken up. And so when Matthew had woken up, that's when the couple decided to put on their running shoes and take their dogs out for a walk. They got home, and then around 12 o'clock the couple went to Home Depot to buy some more tools because they were renovating their backyard at the time, as well as picking up some holiday decorations because it was October 17th, so Halloween was right around the corner. After going to Home Depot, they went to Publix for a little bit of grocery shopping, and also Matthew wanted to cook lunch for the both of them, so he got ingredients for that. They got back home and started eating at around 2 o'clock, and then at 3 o'clock a home inspector had come by because they had just installed brand new windows on the house, so they needed an inspector to come in and make sure that everything was done correctly. Melissa says that the contractor was there for only about 20 minutes before he left, and then Melissa went back up to her office to do a little bit more work until 5:30, and that's when her and Matthew started to drink a little bit and both had a glass of wine. The couple began drinking, they were playing cards and laughing and talking, just basically hanging out with one another. And then after that, Melissa grew very, very tired because she had woken up at 4 in the morning, and then at 10:30 p.m. is when she went upstairs to go to bed. She was actually so tired that she ended up not even falling asleep in the bedroom. She actually fell asleep on this big chair. Like, she had this big round chair in her office. She fell asleep on that, and she ended up not waking up until 8:30 the next morning. So when she woke up, she not only realized that she was on the office chair, but she also realized that she had overslept. And so she immediately jumps up and tries to look for Matthew. But from Melissa's statement, she said that when she went out into the kitchen to try to see if he was in the kitchen, she looks at the ground and the kitchen is a bloody mess. There's blood all over the countertops, the floor, there's broken glass all over the place. So she runs upstairs to the bedroom to see if Matthew's in there, but Matthew's not in there. So she's looking around the house, and that's when she sees from the patio window Matthew was sitting at the patio table, slumped over in a chair, and he was also covered in blood. Melissa ran out there, took him and laid him on the ground to start doing CPR, and as she was doing CPR, that's when she ran inside, grabbed her phone, and called the police. The paramedics didn't show up until 8:45, but when they did show up, they found that Matthew was indeed dead.
911, what is your emergency?
911. I woke up on my boyfriend. He was outside this morning. He's cold. He was just drinking. He's cold.
The address of the emergency. Hello?
I need paramedics.
Matthew was colorless and rigor mortis already started to set in, meaning that he was dead for quite a while before they got there. And from looking at Matthew's body, you can definitely tell that this was not, you know, an accident. This was not the result of like a long night of drinking. This was definitely an attack. From looking at his body, he had a huge laceration in the middle of his back, several punctures and lacerations all over his arms, and defensive wounds across his chest and arms. And so immediately when they found that Matthew was dead, they took Melissa into the station for questioning and just to figure out what exactly happened. Now, as far as Melissa's interrogation, her full interrogation is about 3 hours long, which I will leave in the description box below if you do want to watch it. I highly suggest it because it is very interesting, but if you don't want to watch an entire Avengers movie, I'm just gonna give you the highlights and what's important right now. So 5 minutes into the interrogation, before Melissa even talks about Matthew or the situation or even like just thanking the detectives for their time or something, Melissa immediately starts crying and she starts saying that that day she had a couch coming in, and apparently the couch was like a 2-seater couch that her and Matthew were gonna share, and she started crying and saying like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with the couch now. Like, what am I supposed to do with this couch? It was supposed to be for us, but now it can't be for us.
A month and a half ago, we went to Cade's and we picked out a living room set, but it was on back order. It was supposed to be here this week, but it was delayed.
Okay.
And it's gonna show up, and I'm gonna have this fucking couch. We picked it so it would be a half-my chair. It was a love seat with a console in the middle. It was supposed to be me. And it's gonna show up, and what the fuck do I do with it now?
And I don't know if that's like a grieving response. Maybe she's just starting to like set in on the reality of the situation. But I just thought that was pretty odd that that was the first thing she thought of. Obviously, the police get right to it and they ask her what happened the night before. So she said the night before they started drinking vodka and they were playing cards. But then after a while, they started to get a little bit too lit to the point where they needed to take a break. And so then they took a break for an hour, hour and a half. But when Melissa, because she's telling the police that she had been drinking, the police ask her if she was drunk, and her response is just a little odd.
I got drunk, yeah, but not obliterated, you know, like I would say I was beyond being just buzzed. Because we did get drunk, but that's what we did. We were there at the house ourselves. That's what we would do on a night when we didn't have to get up and do anything the next morning. We had drinks.
And even when Melissa is asked if she was doing drugs, her response is still like a little off.
Besides the alcohol last night, were there any drugs?
No.
We're not the drug police, so no. I'm just asking.
No, he would never touch any of that. Because that was a deal breaker for me, and he knew that. He knew if he touched anything like that again, that he would lose me.
Okay.
That was my #1 deal breaker with him.
And I'm assuming...
So, you know, the drug police, he was not shy about it in his past when he was younger. He was into hard drugs.
Okay.
But it's been years since then, because he knew that was my #1 deal breaker. He touched it again, we were done. I didn't give a shit. That was it.
What kind of drugs was he into previously?
Heroin mostly.
Was that side tangent really necessary? Just like airing out his business for literally no reason, and it has nothing to do with the story? Finally, 17 minutes into the interrogation, Melissa starts to take the detectives along her day. She basically tells them exactly what I told you, how she woke up at 4 and did work at 9. They went to Home Depot around 12, etc, etc. She said that they started drinking around 6 and then took about an hour-long break and then started drinking again at 8 o'clock, and then when they did, they made themselves dinner as well. And then when the detective asked Melissa if, you know, they typically have guests over, or is this usually a thing that they do by themselves, but Melissa says that her and Matthew tend to be just keep to themselves and they don't really go out very much. And she even says that the home inspector guy was the first guest that they've had in their house since September, and it was October at this point, so it's been almost a year since they've had someone over. After dinner, the couple decided to drink a little bit more, but it wasn't too excessive. They were basically just drinking and talking. They were talking about future plans and vacations. Melissa tells police that Matthew did actually bring up a point where he was kind of stressed because he knew that Melissa was the breadwinner of the family and he was a stay-at-home husband, and he just was confiding in Melissa, saying that he sort of feels like a bum, that he's not really doing anything, that he should be providing for her. But Melissa reassured him like she always does, telling him that he does so much for her, and in return this is the least that she can do. As long as he, you know, keeps up with the house, takes care of the animals, she is more than glad to take care of him. And this was a conversation that they had often, Melissa says. She says at around 10 o'clock, that is when she realized she was drinking too much because she started to get the hiccups, and every time she gets the hiccups when she's drunk, she usually always like throws up afterwards, and that's how she knows that she's drinking too much. So she says at 10 p.m. she stopped drinking. She said at 11 o'clock she started to feel really tired, and so she walked upstairs, but she didn't even make it to her bedroom because she fell asleep in her office, which was on the first floor, sort of by the front door. She then goes on to say that she fell asleep in the chair, and then at around 8:30 in the morning she randomly woke up, and that's when she realized that she had overslept and Matthew wasn't in the room with her. Said as she was looking around the house, that's when she discovered Matthew on the patio. He was slumped over in one of the patio chairs at the patio table. She said that she ran over to him and he had no pulse and was extremely cold, and so in a panic she brought him to the ground and started performing CPR. She ran into the kitchen, grabbed her phone, came back outside to continue CPR while she called the police. And so at this point the police are realizing that they have gotten closer and closer to the actual crime itself, and so now they start building the pressure up a little bit. They start, you know, trying to ask Melissa more specific questions to either catch her in a lie or catch a detail that wasn't mentioned before.
Or did you hear anything?
No.
Last night?
No.
Like in the night?
No.
What do you think happened?
I mean, you know, you understand just from our standpoint, obviously, we weren't there last night. If you could just take your best guess of what you thought could have happened.
I don't know. I woke up to just see the kitchen a bloody mess.
And so the police start asking some questions about Matthew. They just asked her typical questions of like, is this something Matthew often does? Does he get so drunk to the point where, you know, things happen, where things get physical? But instead of answering the question, Melissa basically deflects and she starts crying and saying that when she first met Matthew, Matthew had a really bad drinking problem. He was depressed, he was suicidal, and then when he met Melissa, Melissa basically turned his life around and she gave him hope once again, and she gave him all of the things that he wanted in life so that he would be happy again. And basically just talking about Matthew as if he was like her passion project or something. But the police are not buying this. They ask her again, like, that has nothing to do with the question. I asked you if this is something he does often. And so to this, Melissa starts to get a little defensive and she becomes very frantic. In her frantic speaking, she actually reveals a detail that I don't think she was supposed to say, because she starts talking about when she saw Matthew's body and accidentally says that she saw 2 deep cuts on his arm.
I was trying to wrap my head around everything. What do you think happened?
I don't know. What injuries did he have? Because I saw the 2 cuts on his arms. I know they were deep, but what, why?
I don't know. I haven't been in the house, that's why I'm asking you. You were there, obviously. You have his blood all over you.
I don't want to
You're trying to
see
get CPR and help him, I understand. You said he had 2 deep cuts on his arm?
I think they were on, like, his arm. I mean, at that point, I started to freak out. I don't know, it might have been 1 cut, it might have been more than that. That's all I saw, though. I know there was 1, like, deep cut on his arm. But I didn't even think that was enough to bleed out from it. But maybe it would. And there was a broken, I don't remember the glass breaking. There was a broken glass in the kitchen that I walked past.
About an hour into the investigation, that's when Melissa was asked to remove her gloves, and in doing so, she reveals the most deepest and craziest slice on her hand that for some reason she just didn't feel that she had. This cut was so deep that it needed like actual stitches, so the fact that she didn't feel it was very concerning to police because it kind of tells them that possibly Melissa is still running on a bunch of adrenaline from whatever happened earlier.
You put them right in that trash can.
Yeah, I have a little cut on here. But
Can we see where you're going to?
right there.
And that's from what?
I think it's from grabbing the glass. Because I know there was the broken glass this morning. I'm sorry, this morning's not the clearest thing in my mind.
Where?
I remember it was a Hard Rock glass, I believe, in the kitchen. And I think I picked up a piece of it on the floor.
But the detectives just flat out tell her, like, no, you didn't, because this cut is not like a jagged, rigid cut from broken glass. Like, this is a slice, like from a knife. But before digging too deep into her just yet, because at this point, they don't really have a confession or a story from Melissa. So before they start really going in on her and her injuries, they try to squeeze a little bit more information out of her. So at this point, they start asking about the ins and the outs of the relationship itself. Were you guys arguing? Was there something recent that happened that you guys were in an argument about?
Do you all have a history of any kind of fighting or arguing?
Nothing. I mean, couples argue sometimes. We never really fought. We would argue.
Have you guys ever been physical with one another?
No.
Not sexually. I'm talking about like
Physical fighting.
physical fighting.
As physical as we got, it would be one of us having to fucking say, like, if we got too drunk, just sit down and chill out kind of thing. Like, it wasn't hitting, pushing, anything like that. It was more just like, sit down and calm down.
Now, this was a whole lie, and as you will see, the police are actually back at Melissa's house investigating the area. As the police are investigating the area, they don't have a search warrant to go inside of Melissa's home yet, but they are looking around the neighborhood, and they notice that one of the neighbors actually has a Nest security camera in perfect view of Melissa's backyard. The only problem is that Melissa and Matthew's fence was too high to see what was actually going on in the backyard, but the audio is crystal clear. Now, the full audio has never been released to the public, but transcripts as well as bits of the audio have, and so this is what the Nest camera footage had revealed. The night before at 4:32 a.m., you can hear Melissa screaming out the words, quote, "You stay." 1 minute later, at 4:33 a.m., you can hear glass breaking. At 4:34 a.m., 1 minute later, you can hear Melissa scream, quote, "Damn it," followed by, quote, "I hate you." 4:35 a.m., 1 minute later, she yells, quote, get up now." Then she starts to scream "get up" several times until there's a long pause and she screams out, quote, You have the power to do something, so effing die. Then 2 minutes later at 4:37, there's a bunch of loud crashing and banging sounds, and then Melissa screams, quote, "Wake up," followed by, quote, "I hate you." 2 minutes later at 4:39 a.m., you can hear Melissa scream, quote, "Go F yourself," followed by, quote, "Let's go." 4:42 a.m., you can hear Melissa scream again, quote, "F you," followed by the sounds of things breaking, and then followed by, quote, "So effing die." 1 minute later at 4:43 a.m., that is when you can hear Matthew, or a male voice, say something, but it's very inaudible. You can clearly tell that whoever is speaking is not angry. They're not shouting or yelling. They're simply just talking to this other person. And then 1 minute later at 4:44 a.m., that's when you can hear scuffling noises. Then Melissa screams, quote, "No," followed by, quote, "What did I do?" This actually lines up because Matthew was wearing a smartwatch at the time, a smartwatch that detected his heart rate, and a couple minutes after Melissa had screamed, quote, "What did I do?" Matthew's heart rate went to 0. So this was all new information that they were learning back at the scene that they had just informed detectives about. So now the detectives know about the footage. They know that there was an argument last night. They know that Melissa most likely did this crime. So now they're trying to squeeze as much information out of her as they can, knowing the facts of last night. And so in order to catch Melissa in a lie, the officers just ask her a very blunt question, and they just ask her, "Did you and Matthew fight last night?" Because they know if Melissa says no, she's lying. But if she says yes, then she's telling the truth, and they should probably dig into this a little bit more. But Melissa says that no, they didn't fight last night. And so when Melissa is asked why there was so much blood found in the kitchen, Melissa just completely, just flat out says that Matthew had cut himself on something. Why Melissa didn't say this detail earlier, I'm not sure, but the way she says it is kind of eerie to watch. It's kind of as if she goes into a trance as she's talking about this. I'm not sure if she's doing this on purpose or if it's genuinely a trauma response to go into a trance when you're re-remembering all of these like traumatic events.
Did he accidentally cut himself?
He did.
What do you mean?
He did. He accidentally cut himself on some, I don't remember what he was doing. But I think he cut his hand on something. I don't know what I don't remember. I don't know.
When you went to sleep last night was...
But it wasn't like MASCARA in the kitchen kind of thing. It was like wrap a fucking towel around it or a Band-Aid and you would have been fine.
So was there...
But he wasn't bleeding, like, he wasn't, like, bleeding everywhere. It was, I do remember that now.
Randomly, I genuinely don't know why she did this, but for some reason, to the interrogation room, she had brought a photo album of the couple, and she just started, like, a show and tell, and just started showing the police, like, this random photo album of them two, like, them on vacation, their Christmas cards.
I made this for us. This year on our anniversary because it's photos from the times that we first met.
So it's kind of like a little diary of your guys' relationship. I see some photos. That's him and you in there.
Her first Christmas, Vegas, Philadelphia.
I'm not sure if she was doing this as a way to garner sympathy. And then when she is asked why she brought it, she said that on the way out when she was going to the station, she wanted to grab something sentimental and then just saw the photo album and wanted to bring the photo album with. And this is very odd to police because if you just encountered an extremely traumatic situation like that, the last thing you are thinking about is is bringing any sentimental items, the first thing on your mind should be the well-being of your spouse, not, you know, bringing in all these sentimental things that remind you of him. That's more of like an afterthought. And then about an hour and a half into the interrogation, that's when Melissa requests that she wants to go outside and get some fresh air, and so the officers let her to do so. But in doing so, before they actually leave, Melissa is told that there are officers back at her house investigating the house to try to see what exactly happened. I don't know if she puts on like a fake cry, but she looks around at the detectives as if she's crying, but no noises come out. And then when one of the detectives leave the room and she's left alone with the other detective, she says, quote, "Do you have any idea what will happen?" And the detective is just standing there like, I don't know what to tell you.
We'll get working on that too, because we're at the house right now. We're going to be there for a little while, so you're not going to be able to go in there until we're done, but we want to make sure that we get you somewhere, okay? I'll go ahead and conclude this interview. It's 12:17 at Friday, October 18th. And we'll get you a Coke too, okay?
Where are we staying here for a minute?
She wants to sit outside.
Okay.
Yeah.
I gotta tell you something.
Do you have any idea what happened?
I don't. We have detectives there that are trying to, you know, they're processing the house and trying to figure out what happened in there with the evidence and stuff. And we're talking to you and we're talking to the neighbors, so we're working through it. Okay.
It's actually crazy. It's kind of as if your actions have consequences. So then after this, Melissa is then let outside, and she's also given a donut as well as a Coca-Cola because she hadn't been fed yet. And then after this, a photographer comes in and starts taking pictures of her body, just, you know, for reports. And then after this, she is sat down again to basically retell her story. And the police ask her, you know, maybe this time around you'll remember new things. We just need to make sure that we have everything on file. And the second time that she is saying this story, she's saying it in a barely audible voice, and she's saying it very nonchalantly. She's kind of speeding through the story as if, you know, she's bothered or that she's tired or that she's over it.
Walk me back through to the best of your ability, starting from yesterday when you woke up until what got us here today.
Yesterday when I woke up, I got up, I cammed, I did my work. After that, we got dressed, both of us. We took the dog on a walk for 20-30 minutes.
But because of Melissa not really taking much care in how she's saying the story, she's actually caught up in a lie when explaining it. She says in her first story that when she found Matthew on the patio, she immediately put Matthew on the ground and started doing CPR. But in this new line of events, she actually says that she didn't start doing CPR, but instead she rolled Matthew onto his stomach. And then at one point, the detectives point out that Melissa has a scratch on the left side of her neck. And to this, Melissa becomes extremely defensive, and she starts like kind of raising her voice at the police and saying, well, I have panic attacks, so I'm not really sure where it came from. Like, why is that important? And so the police knew that definitely she has some marks on her body that could tell them a little bit more about the incident. And they start referring back to Melissa's hand and trying to figure out where she got that scratch from. She then reveals that she probably cut it on a broken piece of glass this morning, as she said earlier, but again, the police are trying to tell her that this is not a cut that comes from broken glass. This is a clean slice that only comes from something like a knife.
I think I was looking for a phone, and I was panicking and picked up the glass, because I knew it was this morning. I remember that. I think I just couldn't find a phone at the time between the mess that the kitchen was, and I was just panicking.
That's a pretty significant cut.
Yeah, well, I was panicking pretty fucking bad.
Does that look like a glass cut?
I don't know what it looks like. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't.
It must have been a pretty big piece of glass.
Well, I remember there was the glass in the kitchen was a big mug.
Okay.
So I could, honestly, it could have been that. I picked that up and was panicking, kind of. I don't know.
And then Melissa is asked if she remembers waking up at all in the middle of the night. And to this, she sort of stutters and says, quote, "Not that I know." And then she stutters as if she was going to say "not that I know of," but then realized that makes no sense because if you wake up, you're going to remember. And so she just says no. And the detective calls her out on this stutter and says, quote, "It's not a trick question." And she goes, quote, "Yeah, I know. No, I didn't. I fell asleep and I woke up in the same spot." And then 2 hours into the interrogation, that is when the police start to raise up the pressure a little bit. Apparently earlier, Melissa was saying how the couple never really got into arguments, that they were doing really good. But when the officer tells Melissa that actually on the scene of the crime, you told one of the officers that you had gotten into an argument the night before. So he's basically just asking Melissa what this argument was about and why didn't she mention this argument earlier when she was explaining the story. But then Melissa deflects the question and starts to over-explain herself. She says that it was just a heat of the moment thing, that she didn't actually mean that they had an argument. She was just feeling very, very guilty and was basically just saying anything. Then follows it up by saying, quote, "We weren't screaming at each other, not that I know of," which is kind of an odd answer because if you're screaming at someone, wouldn't you remember that? And Melissa also claims that she wasn't extremely drunk the night before because if she stopped drinking at 10 and then went to sleep at 11, that's an hour's worth of just sobering up. And when you are sobering up for an entire hour, you would definitely remember something as big as an argument. So at this point, the police know that Melissa is just dancing around what they want to hear. So they just flat out ask her, "What were you doing at 4 in the morning?"
What happened around 4 o'clock this morning?
4 o'clock? What happened at 4 o'clock?
I don't know. That's what I'm asking you.
I don't know either. Why?
Was there any arguing
At 4 o'clock? Not that I know of.
You would know because either you were sleeping or you weren't.
I believe I was asleep.
Okay. Were you asleep at 4 o'clock this morning?
To my knowledge, yes.
Anytime between when you went to bed at 11 to when you woke up, I think you said 20 minutes before you called us, right?
It was right around, yeah.
So let me just make sure I have the right time so I'm not talking.
The call came in at 8:45.
8:45 is when the call came in, so you said about 20 minutes, maybe even if you lost track of time, say you wake up at 8. Anytime between you went to bed at 11 last night to 8 this morning, did you have any argument?
No, not that I know of.
Well, I mean, you say that a couple times.
Let me say this. So we've been talking to the neighbors. There's cameras all over the neighborhood. There's Ring doorbell cameras and everything.
Okay.
Okay. Sometimes when we ask questions, we usually know the answers to them already. That's why we're asking you this question.
That's why I'm getting the feeling.
Around 4 o'clock this morning, something happened at your house. That's why we're asking.
Okay. What
The only
happened?
person, I don't know, the only person that can tell us that is you because unfortunately I'm not here.
But then she quickly changes her story and says that there was actually an argument and it was due to him coming home extremely drunk after a night out with friends and he came in super loud and that's why she was screaming at him. And for the next 10 minutes, Melissa would go on to a rant where basically she just flat out calls Matthew an alcoholic and how he was constantly drinking all the time and it was her job to help him through it. So the police tell Melissa either you can explain the footage or we just take the footage for what it is. And so at this point, Melissa changes her seating positions and starts to explain the argument that they had the night before, which again is very odd because if she knew that there was an argument in the night and she felt extremely innocent in what she did, why wouldn't she just say that there was an argument in the beginning?
I have no memory of any argument at 4 in the morning.
Okay.
If it was at 4 in the morning, I will tell you right now, I did not stay up until 4 in the morning. I don't know, maybe it's possible he was still up and drunk and woke me up and we got in an argument over that.
So tell me about the argument that you had around 4 o'clock this morning.
I have no memory of that.
Okay.
The argument was him waking me up because he was a night person, as I've told you guys. Him staying up till 4 in the morning whenever he got drunk is not unheard of. I would say he woke me up and we got in an argument over that because he was still up at 4 in the morning drinking.
What happens from there then? Now that you're awake and you're having this memory of arguing with him at 4 o'clock, what do you remember from that time?
I remember having the argument. I don't remember the kitchen there was no broken glass, there was no blood anywhere, nothing. I just remember arguing with him.
Was there anybody else there?
Not that I saw. Oh, we have a camera, yeah. It's a motion activated one, so I mean, but it's on a delay, so if my dog walks past and sets it off, 10 seconds before, it's not gonna go off again when the door opens, through the, does that make, yeah, and it's got the delay on it, so it's not just constantly recording things.
So when you were arguing with Matthew, there was nobody else there that you saw?
No, not that I saw.
Okay.
So at this point, the detective is just sort of fed up with Melissa dancing around what she did and pretending like it wasn't that big of a deal or that it wasn't her fault. And so the detective just flat out says to Melissa, quote, "Do you love him?" And to that, Melissa responds with, quote, "With all my heart." The detective then says to that, quote, "Then why would you say go F yourself to him? I've been married to my wife for years and I would never tell my wife to go F herself, no matter how angry I am." And so that honestly is a valid point, but back at Melissa's house, the police were actually able to get a search warrant for the inside of Melissa's home. Now, while investigating Melissa's home, that is when the police discover that there is a security camera inside of Melissa's home, and it shows a perfect view of Melissa's front door. You can see that at around 4 a.m., Melissa runs into her office, and then a few minutes after that, she comes out of her office and she's following Matthew that walks across the screen. And in the video, you can see Melissa is clearly angry. She's hunched over, she's screaming at him, while Matthew is very calm, collected, and just simply walking. But it seems like Melissa was the more angry one in this situation and that she was the abuser. And then 2 minutes later, that is when you see Melissa running out of the kitchen and next to her office door, and she seems like she's out of breath, that she's in distress. And then she runs back into the kitchen, and then a few minutes later comes back out and she goes to the front door and she just kind of stares at the front door and she's talking in the air, but on her hands you can see that they are covered in blood. And then after a few minutes of talking to the air, that's when she turns around, goes back into the kitchen to, I'm assuming, do whatever she did next to Matthew. And this was a very big piece of evidence because later on, Melissa would try to argue that Matthew was actually the abuser, that he was the ringleader of everything. Very, very clearly in this footage that she voluntarily runs back into the kitchen as if Matthew wasn't a threat or that she wasn't scared of Matthew, because if she was scared of Matthew, she would have just ran out the front door to go grab help, but she didn't. She voluntarily went back. About 2.5 hours into the interrogation, that's when the police just start calling her out on all of her lies, and this part is kind of comical. The way that Melissa's just terrible acting is, just acting as if she didn't do anything, even everyone knows that she did.
Let's just imagine for a second that you're sitting here in my seat and I'm sitting in yours, and I'm telling you the same story you're telling me. It doesn't even, something happened. I need to know, was it an accident? Or just you reacting because you were upset and then you realized, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did this? Or was this something that was planned that you were going to be doing this?
I did not plan it.
I don't know.
Help us understand is what he's saying.
I love that man with all my heart. I never had those thoughts in my mind. My thoughts were, what am I going to buy him for Christmas? I don't know what happened. If it was an accident, then I still Call in someone, something. I wouldn't have let him just die had I known that anything like that had happened.
So, there was no accidents?
I did not.
Because I'm gonna give you another little tidbit. There was something else that was overheard on that video.
What?
I'm not gonna tell you what it was. I'm not going to give you everything.
Melissa starts to change up her story again, saying that before, you know, Matthew never hit her, none of their arguments had turned physical, but now she's switching her story and she's saying that Matthew does hit her sometimes, but not actually hit her. The most he's ever done is like grabbed her or something like that. She changes her story and she explains that the night before, Matthew had a night out with his friends, just out drinking, and then he came home extremely drunk and woke up Melissa. So was extremely angry about this, so then that is when the couple got into an argument, but during this argument it got physical to the point where Matthew had pulled out his pocket knife and started to show it to Melissa as if he was going to use it on her. She said at one point when Matthew lunged at her with the knife, she attempted at grabbing the knife, and that would explain the cut on her hand when she was trying to grab it blade first. She was able to gain control of it a little bit before they started to wrestle. She says that he had put her head on the counter and then flipped her onto the ground, and when Melissa was on the ground, Matthew started to strangle her. And in a struggle, Melissa grabbed the knife that was next to them and stabbed Matthew in the back, which would explain the deep wound found on Matthew's back. And then about 2 hours and 40 minutes into the interview, that is when Melissa asks for a lawyer, and legally when someone asks for a lawyer, the interview has to stop, and so that's exactly what happened. She's left alone in the room for about an hour just to basically analyze her behavior and what she does by herself, and throughout this entire hour, Melissa does some very questionable things.
This can't be my life. No. What is happening? Could you at least come in here and keep me company? I feel like I'm gonna fall apart. I can see you. Should I just get left in here now? Going to freeze me out? Can't have a blanket. I can see it. Oh God, it's so cold. Am I not allowed a blanket or anything?
As you can see, there are portions where she's talking to the air, she's talking to herself, she's talking as if there is someone near her, but as soon as the police walk in, that is when Melissa snaps out of it and she becomes extremely coherent to everything going on. She understands the officers when they're talking to her. The officers explain to her that they need her clothes for evidence, and she is very, very compliable. And at that point, she is changed out of her clothes and they were taken into investigation, and she was given scrubs to wear. At this point, Melissa is given a Happy Meal and she needs to be babysat by 2 female officers. And at one point, which is kind of like funny a little bit, Melissa tries to, I'm assuming, gain sympathy from these 2 female police officers. There's one point where her leg is shaking and she points it out and she says, "Oh my God, look how bad my leg is shaking right now." And the officer literally just tells her like, "Oh, well, that's because your foot is up, like put your foot down and your leg will stop shaking." And so Melissa just kind of like still has her leg shake still, and then she puts her foot down and like continuously like awkwardly eat her meal.
Should my leg would stop shaking?
Oh, you gotta put your foot, your heel down.
They feel at this point that they have enough evidence to arrest Melissa, and that's exactly what they do.
We went back to the scene and we talked to the state attorneys and we consulted with them based on the statements and the evidence. We're going to have to place you under arrest, okay?
We'll let you continue eating this. I'm just going to hold it for you for now, okay?
Is a drink right at your foot?
Okay, thank you.
Yep, that's right.
So as far as Melissa's actual trial, Melissa was getting a lot of media attention because, as I said, she was a very famous cam girl, so a lot of her supporters and subscribers were very shocked to hear this news. And Melissa even went on public interviews to explain how sorry she was and how remorseful she was and how she will continue to plead not guilty because she will go down with the truth. This is actually very contrary to what Melissa says in prison. A lot of Melissa's inmates would actually say that Melissa didn't seem remorseful or sorry about what she did. She would frequently talk to her inmates about how she hated her boyfriend, how he was extremely abusive, and how he was always drunk. And she would even brag to the other inmates about how much money she made off of like being a cam girl and doing OF, and how much money she actually has waiting for her when she gets released from prison. So if she pleaded guilty, she was given a plea deal of just 25 years, but for some reason, Melissa still wanted to plead not guilty, and so because of that, there was a trial. At this trial, Melissa explained her side of the story. She says that what the real story was is that that night, Matthew had come home from a night drinking with a couple of his friends, and he came home extremely drunk, and when he came home extremely drunk, he woke up Melissa in the middle of the night as well. And so this sparked up an argument between the two. One thing led to another with this argument, and it became extremely physical to the point where Matthew pulled out his pocket knife and lunged at Melissa with it. In an attempt to defend herself, Melissa tried to grab the knife before it hit her, and she just so happened to grab the blade of the knife. She was unsuccessful in actually gaining control of the knife, and then Matthew had flung her to the ground and began strangling her, and in a moment of self-defense, that is when Melissa grabbed onto the knife and stabbed Matthew in the back. Now, although Melissa claims that this is the true story, there was a lot of really big plot holes in this story. When Matthew had his autopsy done, there were multiple wounds all over his body, not just one in his back. There was bruises all over his body. There was defensive wounds, especially all over his chest and arms. And if Matthew was the aggressor, he would be left with little to no wounds, or at least not as many wounds as he was found with. And when the officers were analyzing Melissa's cut on her hand, they actually found that the cut was in a rearward direction, meaning that's the only cut that you could get if you were the one holding the knife, not someone holding it the opposite direction of you. So it kind of seemed as if Melissa was the one with the knife, and then as she stabbed Matthew, the blood got slippery and she accidentally drops the knife, or something happened with the knife. And this actually proven from the security camera footage from earlier when Melissa walked to the front door with blood all over her hands before returning back into the kitchen. This would again prove that Melissa was in control of the knife because there was only blood on her one hand while her other hand was left clean. If this was an act of self-defense and she tried to get Matthew off of her or off on top of her, there would be blood all over her clothes and both of her hands. Melissa tried to convince the court as much as she could that Matthew was actually the aggressor, that Matthew was the abusive one. With all of the evidence presented, it was going to be really hard for Melissa to act as if this was in a self-defense. Although there was more truth to this story than the one she told before, it definitely wasn't 100% truthful because there was still a lot of plot holes in her story as to why did she fall asleep on her office chair? Is this something she does often? She would have no issue trying to explain what happened. The court found that this was not an act of someone who accidentally killed their spouse in a moment of rage. This was definitely someone who wanted to make sure that their spouse was dead before calling the police. And that is when the court had found Melissa guilty for the second-degree murder of of Matthew Trussler and was sentenced to 20 years in prison, which I think is kind of odd because her first plea deal was 25 years, and now that she's pleading not guilty, she gets less amount of time. So yeah, that is basically where this story concludes. As for today, Melissa has tried to apply for bail twice, which both times she was denied, and she is set to be in there until the year 2040 and is set to be released at 47 years old. That is the end of today's video. If you guys found this video interesting, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. If you want to follow me on any of my socials, like my Instagram, that will be linked down below, as well as my PO box if you want to send me anything, and as well all of the makeup that I put on my face. So if you're curious what my lip is, what my blush is, all of that will be linked down below. As for my makeup today, I kind of went for like a very Kylie inspired look. And so as always, I love you, I love you, I love you, and do something that makes you happy today.